Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Hello, and welcome to today's International Transportation and Compliance webinar hosted by Grainger Global Export. We have attendees from all across the globe, so it's such a pleasure and very exciting to have you all here with us today. My name is Samantha Lebos. Hello, and I'll be your moderator for the next hour. I'm a part of the digital team here at Grainger Global Export, and I'm so excited to be hosting today's session. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce today's speaker, Matthew Myers. A little bit about Matthew. He joined Grainger in 2015 and has held several different roles within the International Logistics and Trade Compliance team. His current role is supporting the development of enhanced supply chain strategy for Grainger's Puerto Rico business. So he knows a lot about international logistics, and we're very lucky to have him present today's session as well as all of this great information with us today. If you'd like to learn more about Matthew, feel free to click on the speaker bio icon on the screen. In today's webinar, Matthew is going to touch on export destinations, Grainger modes of transport, Incoterms, and so much more. But before I hand the mic over to Matthew, I'd like to cover a few items about this presentation and the On24 webinar platform because we want this to go as smoothly as possible for you all. So first, sound is only available through your computer, and please make sure you only have one web browser open. Next, we'd love to hear from you during today's session. We think it's important that we answer all of your questions. So if you have a question for Matthew, feel free to send it through the Q&A section on the left side of the player, I think it is. We have a number of team members here answering questions live, and we'll also be answering questions at the end of the session. Do not worry, please. If you have a question and we don't get to it, we'll be sure to follow up through email. We want to make sure that all of your questions are answered. Also, very, very exciting, a certificate will be available to download at the end of the session. So enable your pop-ups on your web browser so you can print the certificate and hang it up on your desk. Also, if you have a few minutes at the end of the session, please fill out the webinar survey to help us make sure the next webinar is even better and greater for you. Just a few more notes about the webinar. Today's session will be available on demand after the webinar has ended. So if you need to revisit a topic we covered today, please feel free to replay the webinar at your convenience. And if you have any questions about Grainger Global Export Services, please email us directly by clicking the email widget in the navigation section below the presentation. Also in the widget section, you will find the Q&A icon, speaker bio, Grainger Global Export Resources, and the certificate icon. And I think we've covered it all. So with that being said, I'm ready to get started, so I'm sure you are all ready as well. I will turn it over to Matthew, and we will begin the webinar. Matthew, over to you.
Thank you for that great introduction, Samantha. Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Myers. I really appreciate everyone joining today. Look forward to spending some time with you guys. Here at Grainger, we understand the complexities of international shipping, and whether you've been in the business for many years or just a few months, you have come to the right place. Grainger Global Export is a unique team within Grainger that is specially designed, whether you're a customer across the globe or a U.S. company looking to export, we are here to help you understand more about international shipping and answer any questions that you might have. Today's session is focused on covering the basics you may need in order to make sure your exporting process runs smoothly. Again, throughout the webinar, please keep in mind that those that have a Grainger account can at any time reach out to their Grainger representative to learn more about how we can help. If you're new to Grainger, please email us directly by clicking the email icon in the webinar below. Now let's jump into the fundamentals of international shipping. Remember to ask questions in the Q&A box throughout the webinar. If we don't get to your questions, we're going to spend some time at the end answering questions. We will reach out to everyone directly through email. Okay, so in terms of today's agenda, we want to be able to provide everyone general awareness and tips about purchasing and shipping internationally, but also some specifics about Grainger's export program. So we want to cover export destinations, specifically that Grainger has had experience in, components that make up an international shipment, some helpful definitions, modes of transport and services that Grainger transacts in, differences in shipment modes, documentation, which can be just as, if not more important than the physical transport, Incoterms, a little information about Grainger's DC and fulfillment network, and lastly, touch on the shipment of hazardous materials or dangerous goods, as they're frequently referred to outside of the U.S. So in 2018, Grainger has exported and transacted to over 150 countries across 6 continents in the world. So what this tells us is, first, Grainger has experience dealing with some of the nuances that can occur in shipping to various destinations across the world. We have strong partnerships with international service providers, both from a parcel and an ocean freight standpoint, that can get shipments to a wide variety of destinations across the world. Some may be easier than others. And then lastly, from a documentation standpoint, while it is the importer's responsibility to understand what the requirements are to import goods through customs in their local region, there's difference. The import requirements can be different, say, importing into Brazil than, say, the United Kingdom. So we've been able to transact with customers across a wide variety of the world, and that really provides us, allows us to have solutions that can be unique to your particular need. Taking a look at an international shipment or international freight transaction, there's really 2 main components. And the first is the domestic side. So this is the shipment from the point of origin, or in this case, let's say the Grainger distribution center, to another location in the U.S. So this could be a customer's freight forwarder. This could be one of Grainger's nominated freight forwarders. This could be to perhaps a middleman or an end user in the United States that will be then exporting. So for most customers, the standard ground freight to a freight forwarder, other continental U.S. location, is prepaid by Grainger if that order is over $1,500 US. And so that's the domestic component. There's also the international component. And on the international side, charges for air and ocean freight or courier can vary widely depending on the destination, the availability of space and capacity on that route, the weight and volume of the shipment, as well as any extra documentation requirements that might be needed. The importer of record, and many times the buyer, is liable and responsible for the payment of duties and taxes, and also for meeting all the requirements related to that import transaction. So I already mentioned, it is important for importers to know with their local customs or other regulatory agencies what the requirements are to import items, into that particular country. And Incoterms, which we're going to talk a little bit later in the presentation, play an important role in determining, who is responsible for, what component of the international shipment, both from a risk standpoint, a risk of loss standpoint, and then also cost. We've gone ahead and put together a couple definitions that could be helpful when talking about the shipment life cycle. The first is delivery. Most people would think this is, the delivery to the final destination where the product is going to be consumed or used to some extent. But really, what we mean by delivery here is where is the shipment delivering to where the risk of loss passes from the seller to the buyer. So depending on the Incoterm, which again we'll discuss, or the contract terms, this could be either at a freight forwarder location, here in the U.S., or it could be at a destination airport or seaport. The next term is pre-carriage. Pre-carriage is really that domestic portion that we talked about on the previous slide. This is the initial transport of goods from the seller to the main point of where that international shipment is going to take place. So like a seaport or an airport. Typically, the pre-carriage is done by rail or truck, depending on how far it's going, and what the logistics network looks like at that origin. Main carriage is the primary, international transport. Typically, it's the longest path of the journey, and it's the international component of the shipment. Again, for the most part, we would consider this to be a sea or an air shipment. But in the case of Canada and Mexico, it could be, a ground or truck or rail shipment. And then lastly, on carriage is kind of the final destination, the final mile. So this is transport from the port of arrival, the air or seaport, in the destination country up to the buyer's premises. Again, this is typically also a ground transportation by truck or rail. There are three main modes of transport when we consider international shipments, and Grainger has experience and transaction all of them. So this chart kind of gives a good overview of those different modes. We'll go into detail about the specifics and when perhaps one is more suitable than the other. But taking a look first at ocean freight, ocean freight can really be categorized as LCL, or less than container load. So this is when the shipment consists of volume that is maybe 1 or 2 pallets, not the entire size of an international shipping container. Or full container, or FCL. This is when the order size is from one shipper to one consignee, and it's taking up the entire size of 20, 40, 40-foot high cube container. And in an ocean freight mode, we can transact in either FCA free carriage or CP2 carriage paid to terms. And again, depending on what the contract terms will dictate what Incoterm we're going to work under. In the event of an FCA shipment, Grainger is responsible for the transport up to the customer's freight forwarder. And really then the customer or the buyer is responsible for making the arrangements for the main carriage or the international portion of the shipment. Or CPT, this is where Grainger's carrier or freight forwarder is used to deliver the goods to the destination seaport. In air freight, or we can kind of call this, air freight, there's two different components. So first is a courier shipment or a parcel shipment. These are shipments that are typically less than 150 pounds, 68 kilos. We think of these as parcel shipments that we work with integrators on. Incoterms for those can either be Ex Works or DAP. Grainger will always process the shipment, but the shipment, depending on whether or not the terms are prepaid or collect, dictate whether that's going to be Ex Works and DAP. And again, the reason why we use those terms for that mode is just based on the fact that the same provider is handling the entire shipment life cycle, right, from pickup, the international main carriage, all the way to the on carriage and delivery. The second option or service level in the air freight mode is heavyweight air freight, we can call. So this is shipments that are greater than 150 pounds or 68 kilos. And similar to ocean freight, those can move under FCA or CPT terms depending on the contract and depending on who's going to make arrangements for that international portion of the shipment. Is it going to be Grainger under our carrier/forwarder or under the customer or buyer's contract? And then lastly, again, ground shipments. This is a trucking or a ground courier type service. These would go FCA, and we would deliver to the customer's forwarder. We'll now dive into a little bit more about the specifics of the different shipment modes. So the first is parcel. Parcel is a type of air service typically. And it has some specific nuances on what type of shipments can move within a parcel network. So we can consider parcel shipments that are not greater than 68 kilos or 150 pounds, not greater than 119 inches in length, and 165 inches in length and girth. So calculating the physical dimensions of the shipment. Parcel shipments are not palletized. They're typically packaged in a cardboard carton or box, if you will, that move through the parcel network, because these shipments move typically faster. It's not typical for parcel providers to manage loose freight or freight that is palletized or on a skid. Because parcel shipments are moved through integrators, meaning that it's the same provider that is typically handling the door-to-door service, there's not that handoff to a different provider within the shipment. They typically move either prepaid or collect and door-to-door service. So it's uncommon to have a parcel shipment where it picks up at origin and then they delivers to just the airport at destination. It's typically a door-to-door service in the parcel mode. Parcel mode, common carriers I think that we're all familiar with, UPS, FedEx, and DHL are all internationally known integrators. There's also some local integrators. Aramex is an example in the Middle East region that are regionally specific and have strengths in terms of a regional network. In terms of documentation, documents such as commercial invoice and packing list, and then the shipping label, which is kind of the ticket, if you will, for the shipment, those are attached to the carton and travel with the freight. Parcel, is the quickest mode. It has the shortest transit time, but the highest incremental cost. That doesn't always necessarily mean that it's the most expensive option if you have a smaller volume shipment, but traditionally compared to the other modes, it has the shortest transit time and the highest incremental cost. Next is air freight. I like to call this heavyweight air freight because parcel is a component of air freight as well. But when we talk about heavyweight air freight, these are shipments that are typically not moving under a parcel network. So these are shipments that are greater than 68 kilos or 150 pounds. Really anything can go air at any size, but articles that are greater than 125 inches long, 88 inches wide, and 64 inches high are considered main deck or oversized, meaning that these types of articles do not fit in the cargo hold of most passenger aircraft. Particularly that height 64 is a real strict requirement. If it doesn't fit under passenger aircraft, those have to move main deck, meaning on an all-cargo aircraft. That could change the freight pricing and routing because there's just less network and less capacity of freighter aircraft. Air freight has a higher cost, but a quicker transit time when compared to ocean freight. Air shipments can move, based on Incoterm, either FCA or CPT, as we earlier discussed. And air freight shipments are typically executed by a freight forwarder. So it's rare that you're contracting directly with the airline cargo carrier like a Lufthansa or Cargolux, but there's an intermediary who makes the arrangements with the carrier, such as BDP International, Panalpina, UPS Supply Chain Solutions. They are the ones that are booking and making the arrangements with the air cargo carrier. The last mode we'll go into detail on is ocean freight. So really there's no weight or dimension minimum or restriction for ocean freight. Typically shipments, though they're less than 500 kilos or 1 cubic meter, it'd be more cost effective to move via parcel or air. So, incrementally, air and parcel mode are more expensive than ocean freight. But again, for smaller volume shipments, you really need to take a look at, what is the most cost-effective mode because of minimums. Ocean freight, while a longer transit time, could be actually more expensive. There's two ocean freight modes or categories, as we discussed before. LCL, which is less than container load, so the shipment of maybe 1 or 2 pallets. Or full container load, which is the shipment of an entire volume that fits in in an entire container. Internationally, there's 3 main types of standard ISO containers. That's a 20-foot container, a 40-foot standard container, and then a 40-foot high cube. The high cube being the same length as the 40-foot standard, but has slightly more height to it. So you could stack some additional volume in that 40 high cube. Similar to the heavyweight air freight shipments, ocean freight shipments are executed by freight forwarders. Again, some of the same freight forwarders that offer heavyweight air freight service also offer ocean freight service. And then they partnership and contract directly with global steamship lines. This is the Maersk, the CMA, CGM, the MSC carriers. Documentation for ocean freight shipments, because of the long transit time and kind of the multiple handling that goes on in ocean freight, documents don't typically travel with the freight. They're sent overhead via courier to the nominated freight forwarder, and then that freight forwarder at origin will send to their destination office or to the consignee to send over to customs. Ocean freight, again, has the lowest incremental cost, but the longest transit time. So depending on the mode and the volume, or the destination and the volume, it might be the right approach for your shipment. And similar again to air freight, ocean shipments move based on Incoterms. FCA and CPT are the Incoterms we mostly transact with on ocean freight shipments here at Grainger. I mentioned before that documentation is almost, if not more important than the actual physical transport of goods. And international shipment documentation is important because it typically defines the bill of sale, but also is used for customs clearance either at origin or destination. So the documentation and ensuring the documentation is accurate and knowing what documents are required is an important aspect to ensuring you have a smooth international transaction. So we'll go over a couple standard documents and then some commonly asked additional documents. So standard with every international shipment, you're going to have a commercial or pro forma invoice. This is, again, like a bill of sale outlining what's been sold at what cost, from who to whom, and under what terms. A packing list, which essentially has really all the same components of the commercial invoice, but without price. Again, it's describing or detailing what is included in that particular shipment. And then lastly, in terms of standard documents, is the shipper's letter of instruction, or SLI. This document typically tells a freight forwarder or carrier instructions on that shipment. So who to deliver to. It could be different than the consignee listed on the commercial invoice. It could have some trade data elements needed to file an export or import customs declaration, and any other special components or details that a freight forwarder might need to execute that shipment. So different countries have different documentation requirements. They can vary widely, but additional documents are sometimes required outside of those first three, and the most common ones are a certificate of origin. The certificate of origin details where the goods that are being shipped are produced or manufactured. So it's important on certificate of origins to understand that where a good is produced or manufactured isn't necessarily where the shipment is coming, the origin of the shipment itself. Right, so take for an example, you could purchase, a saw that was manufactured in China, but is physically shipping from the United States. So the certificate of origin is going to show that, the origin of that saw is China because that's where it was manufactured or produced, and not necessarily where the shipment was originating from. So certificate of origin is important because in most free trade agreements, customs agencies want to know where that item is produced or manufactured to determine whether or not that item meets the rules of origin requirements for that preferential trade program. So, NAFTA is a common free trade agreement that we have between ourselves, Canada, and Mexico. There's a special certificate of origin form under the current NAFTA rules and Grainger can produce that NAFTA certificate if needed, if that item does qualify under the rules of origin for NAFTA. Also, government agencies want to understand the origin or manufacturer of an item because it could change the rate of duty or admissibility of that particular item in the destination country. Another common additional document is the IMDG, which is the International Maritime Organization Dangerous Goods Shippers Declaration. This is for hazardous or dangerous goods shipments. Again, this is a form that outlines specific details of a commodity if that shipment is a regulated hazardous or dangerous good. And then lastly, another commonly requested document is a certificate of conformity. This is typically requested by destination country agencies if there is some specific certification or requirement for that particular article to be imported. Typically, this will require a pre-shipment inspection to ensure that it conforms to whatever product standards are in that particular destination. So, common example of this would be the SASO certificate, which is a requirement for certain commodities to be imported into Saudi Arabia. Here is an example of a commercial invoice. Again, the commercial invoice, at a high level, lets customs authorities know what's being shipped, so it details the description of the items. It includes some trade data elements like a harmonized tariff schedule number. It will include the country of origin, and then also, the price or the sold price between the unit price or the sold price between the seller and the buyer. The commercial invoice will also include information such as, who the shipper is, who the consignee is, what mode the shipment is moving under, and then again, what the terms of sale are for that particular shipment. Next, the packing list. The packing list is very similar to the commercial invoice. It has all of the same data requirements except for pricing information. So again, it's a list of what's being included in a particular shipment, but it doesn't have the pricing details or the terms of sale details that the commercial invoice would have. Lastly, an example of a certificate of origin. This is of a generic type certificate of origin, fairly commonly used. Again, the purpose of the certificate of origin and is required by some customs agencies, and perhaps not even all the time, but especially if you're going to receive any duty-free treatment or there's a free trade agreement, customs agencies want to know or have a certified statement of the origin of manufacture or production of that particular good. Again, it's not necessarily where the shipment's coming from, but it's where that shipment was produced or manufactured. Certain free trade agreements, NAFTA is a good example, they have a specific form that the certificate of origin must be typed in. Grainger does provide certificate of origins, can provide certificate of origins for shipment for any international shipment, and we can provide NAFTA certificates if the shipment meets the rules of origin specifically for NAFTA. Okay, changing gears a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about Incoterms. I've mentioned this word Incoterms several times now. And Incoterms, or international commercial terms, are generally accepted across many countries in the world and are published by the International Chamber of Commerce. The most recent version of terms are called Incoterms 2010. They went into force in January 2011. Typically, Incoterms are updated by the International Chamber of Commerce every 10 years. So we should look forward to perhaps some updates in Incoterms in 2020, 2021. But today, these are the general terms that shipments can move under. And really what Incoterms help to standardize is to define between the buyer and the seller where the risk of loss and also the responsibility in terms of payment transfers throughout the shipment life cycle. Because there's so many different components to an international transaction, it's important to clearly define who's going to be responsible for what. So looking at this Incoterm chart, if you look towards the left of the chart, you've got Xworks, which has the most responsibility on the buyer, all the way to the other end, the right side, which is DDP, Delivery Duty Paid, which puts all of the risk and responsibility and cost on the supplier. So, and then it graduates down from there. Different Incoterms are used based on different shipment modes. So that's important to tell that maybe not all Incoterms are applicable based on the shipment mode. And Grainger really conducts business in 4 Incoterms. So if a shipment is parcel shipments really only move under Xworks, or what we'll call a D term, so a DAP or DDP. And Grainger offers either Xworks or DAP terms, which is essentially collector prepaid for parcel shipments. For heavyweight air freight shipments and ocean freight shipments, we will typically transact either in FCA, meaning that Grainger will make all of the arrangements and also incur the cost to ship up into a customer's nominated freight forwarder here at origin. And then once that's delivered to the freight forwarder, the consignee or the buyer is responsible for that international portion of the shipment. Or CPT, which really means that Grainger or the seller is responsible for shipping up until the destination airport or seaport. Once that shipment arrives at the destination airport or seaport, it then turns over to the buyer to be arranged. It's important that when you're in a contract or when you're executing a purchase agreement internationally that you outline what Incoterm you're going to be buying under, but then also the named place. So for an example, you could have CPT Dammam, Saudi Arabia. You always follow the Incoterm with a named place so that it's clear where that risk and where that transfer is going to take place. Equally, under FCA terms, you might have FCA Miami, Florida. Again, that's where Grainger will deliver the shipment, and the risk of loss as well as the cost then transfers over from the buyer to the seller. I mentioned before that not all Incoterms may be appropriate depending on the mode of transport. So at the top of the chart here, you can see Xworks, FCA, CPT, CIP, DAT, DAP, DDP. These terms are really appropriate for any mode of transport. So that could be a ground shipment, that could be an air freight shipment, or an ocean freight shipment. And then 4 of the terms are really specific and only appropriate for ocean freight shipments. So for an example of that is FOB. This is free on board. So this is when the risk and cost transfers from when that shipment moves from the dock onto the ship. Again, that wouldn't be applicable for an air freight shipment, so really FOB in this case is only applicable for ocean freight shipments. Incoterms can be, there's a lot of different Incoterms. They can be complicated. We can provide, the Grainger customer experience team or your local seller, they can provide some more details about these Incoterms. All right, just a reminder for everyone, we are taking live questions, so please do not hesitate to submit a question in the chat. We're also going to spend some time to take live questions here at the end. Incoterms, I know, is a topic that can be confusing and typically generates a lot of questions, so do not be afraid to answer those or to ask those questions. Taking a look a little bit deeper, I want to go over some of the Incoterms that Grainger specifically transacts in, and this chart again helps to show the different components of the shipment life cycle. So taking first a look at ExWorks and FCA. So ExWorks, or EXW, that means that the risk transfers from Grainger, or the seller, to the customer or buyer when the goods are at the disposal of the buyer at a Grainger location. So take for an example, we have the term ExWorks Grainger Fountain in South Carolina. That would imply that the customer would be responsible for the risks and costs, including loading of that shipment onto the transport vehicle from our distribution center at origin. Grainger will typically use this term for collect courier shipments. These are, again, the FedEx, UPS, and DHL, or for shipments that are moving ground cross-border to Canada or Mexico. The next term here is FCA, or free carrier. This means that the risk transfers from Grainger to the customer when the goods have been delivered to the customer's freight forwarder or carrier at a named place. So for an example, FCA Panalpina, Miami, Florida. That would imply that the customer would be responsible for the risks and costs from Miami, Florida to whatever destination they're shipping to. So in the case of Grainger, this is always going to be a U.S. location, and again really means that Grainger is going to be responsible for that pre-carriage up to that U.S. named place, and then the customer, the buyer, is making the arrangements for the international main carriage and then the on carriage. Taking a look now, we've got the ocean freight path on the top, the air freight path on the bottom, but for CPT and DAP, CPT, or carriage paid to, means that the risk transfers from Grainger to the customer when the goods have been delivered to the first destination airport or seaport. So Grainger pays the cost of the main carriage to the named place at destination. So we'll take for an example CPT Dubai Airport, UAE. This would imply that Grainger is going to be responsible for arranging the shipment from our distribution center in the U.S. up into when that shipment arrives at Dubai Airport. The buyer then is responsible for the risk and for the costs for the importation and then that final mile delivery, or the on carriage, from the named place up into their premises or where that shipment is going to be delivered. DAP, or delivered at place, means that the risk transfers from Grainger to the customer when the goods are placed at the disposal of the customer at their named location at destination. So it does not include unloading, and it does not include customs clearance. So for an example, DAP Singapore. This would imply that Grainger would be responsible for all the risks and costs to deliver to someone's address in Singapore, but the customer or the buyer would still be responsible for the import customs clearance, any duties or taxes to be owed, and then also the unloading of that vehicle at the warehouse or at the facility in Singapore. So I hope that gives a little high-level information and introduction awareness to Incoterms. They are important because it just helps to define clearly who's going to be responsible for what. So by clearly defining what the Incoterm is going to be at the time of contract negotiation or PO issuance, saves a lot of headache down the road when every party knows what they're going to be responsible for. Again, any questions, please feel free to submit. I wanted to go ahead and talk a little bit about Grainger's export distribution network and kind of what our fulfillment channel is. So Grainger really does have a world-class distribution network across North America. But for our export customers, we really leverage two of our distribution centers. So the first one we call GVDC, or Greenville, South Carolina Distribution Center. It's located in Greenville, South Carolina. The building is about 1.1 million square feet. And Greenville is conveniently located to major seaports as Jacksonville, Charleston, Savannah. It's also conveniently located or one-day transfer to Miami and the major air gateway of Atlanta and New York. So Greenville is a good central location to the East Coast ports and airports, and again, is suitable for shipments that are going to Europe, Middle East, Africa, Atlantic seaboard origination. The other distribution center that we leverage within the Grainger network is our SFDC, or San Francisco Distribution Center. It's located in Patterson, California, which is near to San Francisco. That building is just under 1 million square feet at 820,000. I'm sorry. That building, again, based on its West Coast location, is a convenient location for shipments going to Asia Pacific, Australia, New Zealand, to some extent as well, the Indian subcontinent. Patterson Distribution Center is several hours away from Oakland Seaport, as well as San Francisco Airport, as well as major hub Los Angeles, both for air and sea freight shipments. So, our customer experience team here at Grainger and our sellers, our account managers, they are, will help to work with you to determine, what's the best distribution of origin based on the location of your freight forwarder or the location of where we're sending the shipment, and as of course, product availability. Changing gears to talk a little bit about dangerous goods or hazardous materials, as they're known in some countries. There are specific nuances to shipping hazardous materials. They will require special handling, packaging, marking, label, and documentation, both from a domestic and an international standpoint. And Grainger has some specific policies on what we can do in regards to the shipment of hazardous materials internationally. So Grainger will only ship materials deemed as dangerous goods or hazardous materials via ground or ocean freight only. So we won't, unfortunately, be able to offer air freight service on our hazardous materials, but we do have the capabilities to send ground or ocean freight. Shipments that are hazardous going international, we will be able to provide the applicable shipping papers, that IMDG declaration. And of course, we will ensure that the shipments are packed, marked, and labeled in accordance with IMDG and also U.S. Department of Transportation regulations. Special nuance, lithium batteries and magnetized materials, those have specific requirements and regulations for shipping via air freight. We do deem those as hazardous materials here at Grainger. So again, that would fall under our hazardous material program, and we would only be able to offer ocean freight shipment on those, or we can send those to stateside U.S.-based freight forwarder for the customer to go ahead and make that international arrangement, ensuring that the product is documented, marked, labeled, and packaged in accordance to the regulation. Dangerous goods, can be very specific in terms of what's regulated and what's not. So I would encourage a conversation with our customer experience team and or your account manager to understand what we are able to and what we're not able to do and related to hazardous materials, and perhaps what additional costs might be incurred for us to prepare and export those articles. Okay, so just to recap, we talked a little bit about first export destinations, the wide variety of destinations that Grainger has transacted in, and some of the complexities that could occur destination by destination, international freight components, the inland freight, the pre-carriage, the international portion of shipment, the main carriage, why those are important distinctions, We went over the different Grainger modes of transport, parcel, air freight, ocean freight, how those modes are different, and when it might be appropriate to use one mode over the other. Documentation, which again I can't stress enough, is just as important as the physical movement of goods. The documentation is absolutely necessary for the proper importation of shipments into the destination country. Incoterms, again, which are important to help define roles and responsibilities in the terms of sale. A little bit about Grainger's export DC network, and then lastly, the shipment of hazardous materials and Grainger's policy around shipping hazardous materials. So again, thank you for everyone for joining today. Again, this was, some of the basic fundamentals to international shipping and compliance. I could probably ramble on and talk about this all day. So there is, it is complex. So if there's any questions or any doubts that anyone might have, again, please reach out to your Grainger representative or email us using the link below. Just a reminder, we are now going to spend some time answering any of your live questions. So I will turn it back over to Samantha to get us queued up for the Q&A portion.
Nice job, Matthew. Thank you so much for that great presentation. We have some time for questions. We had a lot of great questions, so I'm actually going to push it back over to Matthew so he can answer them for everyone on the line.
Yeah, so again, thanks everyone. Appreciate everyone coming out to join today. So we got a lot of questions about different types of certificate of conformities or other type of product certifications. So what we can say about that is, one of the challenges that we and any exporter would have, right, is knowing the specific requirements or documentation requirements that are necessary for importing into your specific country. So really, as the importer, the onus is on you to understand what the import requirements are for that particular commodity, and then we can work with you on a kind of a case-by-case basis. What I can say is, we are a distributor with many different suppliers, and we're not the manufacturer. So a lot of times, again, depending on what's being asked, we can perhaps partner with the supplier, or we can work with a third-party testing or inspection agency to issue whatever that sort of certificate of conformity might be for import into the destination country. So again, we're limited to some extent because we're a distributor and we have such a wide product offer, but we can definitely work with you on an individual basis to make sure that you have what you need to import the products. But again, the most important part, everyone, is for you to do a little bit of research on what sort of documentation requirements outside of some of the common documentation requirements that we went over today are necessary to import that commodity into your destination country.
We also had a lot of feedback on the webinar itself. The presentation and the webinar will be available through the link that you used to access the webinar this morning. So if you ever need a refresher, please click that link. It should be available within 48 hours. Also, we'll give you another minute to ask any last-minute questions before we sign off. So any other questions you may have, please send them through the chat, and then Matthew will be more than happy to answer them for you. So let's take a minute, and we'll make sure that we have all of your questions answered.
Yeah, we look forward to any of your questions. We also got several questions about our our coverage in terms of customer coverage and how we handle that. So maybe, Samantha, I can turn over to you a little bit about how that works in terms of what our coverage is around the globe for customers.
Yeah, so right now our main coverage is through email marketing. Email is really popular on our side. We hit all of the regions, Middle East, Asia, Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean. So our emails they're focused on the products and any questions you may have, including benefits of your Grainger account and how you can utilize Grainger.com. So if you have any questions or would like to be placed on our email list, please feel free to just click the email icon at the bottom of the screen. They're very beneficial. We have a lot of great feedback, and you'll be directed to a Grainger representative. If you don't have a Grainger account, feel free to contact us, and we'll make sure that we're taking care of you any way that we can.
That's great. So we got a question about certificates of origin and how often we review those with our suppliers. So we review them at least once a year. We go through and we review and we solicit from our suppliers the country of origin for the products that they sell to us. And we also have agreement with our suppliers that if they change the sourcing of a particular product, that they inform us so that we can update our system and have an accurate certificate of origin. If we don't have, for whatever reason, the country of origin or manufacturer on the item, before we actually ship that item, we do perform an inspection on that item and make sure that we have the accurate country of origin for that particular item before we export. Because, again, we're not the manufacturer of the items, some certificates, like the current NAFTA certificate, for example, you can issue a NAFTA certificate for a blanket period, but because sourcing might change from our suppliers, we really only issue certificate of origin or NAFTA certificates on a case-by-case individual shipment basis so that we can ensure the country of origin accuracy for all of our export orders. So yes, we do review those, and so we also can, I think if you reach out to your account manager or through our digital channel, we can provide a little more information on that because we do have several different approaches to ensure that we have accurate country of origin for all of the products that we offer for export.
Great. And also, if you need help figuring out who your Grainger representative is, please email us using the email link at the bottom of the presentation, and we'll be more than happy to help you out.
Well, appreciate everyone, again, joining. Hopefully this was just, it can be complicated, shipping internationally. I always like to joke here at Grainger. I think some people just think they order something and they don't realize we have a whole team here that's like really specifically designed to help customers and Grainger transact internationally. But reach out to us, and if you have questions about our product offer for international, what's available, any questions about the documentation that we offer, and also any questions you might have about what might, where we can ship to, and restrictions on, a government basis. So we've got a wealth of knowledge here at Grainger. We're here to help. So thanks everyone for coming out and joining, and hopefully we can hear from you all soon.
And of course, thank you, Matthew, for joining us today and sharing your expertise. I know I learned a lot, so I'm sure everyone did as well. But please take the survey at the end of the webinar. It will be very beneficial for us for the future webinars. We also got a question about learning more about future webinars, and we'll be sure to email everyone once we have more webinars planned for you all. But until then, I hope everyone has a really great day, evening, night, whatever time it is by you. And I look forward to speaking to everyone else again very soon. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.